today I'm going to be talking a little bit about, I'll touch a bit on what PsyCare UK does and how I see that fitting into spaces beyond the festival setting. We've got quite a lot of our volunteers here, so I'm going to ask you guys not to put your hands up for a minute, but can I just get a show of hands? How many people know what PsyCare UK do? Okay, cool, quite a few of you. And how many of you have actually seen our spaces live at festivals? Okay, a couple, nice. So just to give a little bit of background about myself, when I was at school, I got on with everybody, but I didn't really fit in anywhere, and I didn't know what path in life I wanted to take. So I left school at 16 and just I ended up doing hairdressing originally, just because it was something to do. I then ended up working at a university. It was meant to be a 3-month temp job, turned into nearly 11 years. But that job really allowed me to take my time in exploring life, exploring where I fit into the world, find my tribe, and all of that kind of thing. So I've had quite an unconventional path into this work. I found PsyCare UK, at the time they were called Cosmicare UK, and it was at Boomtown Festival in 2011, when it was quite a small festival. A friend of mine chose to take a microdot, which is quite a strong dose of LSD, as soon as we arrived at the festival, so we hadn't even explored the lay of the land yet. And I could see that they were starting to lose touch with consensus reality quite a lot. And so we were trying to find a space to take them that was going to help them sort of calm down. And we were in the campsite, and I just felt like the surrounding tents were a bit too, I don't know, it didn't feel very calming or welcoming. But as we explored the festival, it got more and more crazy. We had people in fancy dress, 2 girls dressed as Siamese twins, with 2 guys attached either side of them, dressed as feathered birds, squawking at him. And I started to question my decisions, wondering what I was doing and where I was actually trying to take him. And it was just luck that I bumped into a friend of mine in the crowd who happened to be volunteering for Cosmicare UK. I hadn't heard of them at the time, but from my experience of other festivals and other welfare services, initially when she said, "I know where you need to bring him, I'm volunteering for this thing, bring him," I was a bit worried because I was so used to going into spaces and it being very kind of stark, white, cagey, sort of sectioned off with fences, them being quite judgmental of substance use. And I just really didn't want them to sort of hyper-focus on his bad decisions, if that was how they were going to see it. She reassured me that it really, really wasn't the case, that actually it was the most understanding place for this situation. And so we took him, and I instantly felt like I was at home. It really, just the way that they approached him, the way they welcomed him into the space, the way that they were all working together as a team, the way that they decorated the space, all of it, it just felt so right. And I knew at that moment that I'd found my path, but I didn't quite know what that would look like. So it's really, for me, it's a real honour to be here and be talking at this wonderful event as well. It's, really, really amazing for me. So a little bit about PsyCare at festivals. Many of you know what it is, but we hold a safe space predominantly for psychedelic crisis, but overall, as time's gone on, we've grown to encompass all kind of general welfare cases as well. So whether it's that their tent has flooded and ended up with a wet sleeping bag and they need somewhere dry to sleep, to some of the most extreme psychedelic crises, everything is about set and setting. It's a volunteer community that really, we don't judge anybody. We don't even wear uniform. The only thing that identifies us is a lanyard that says that we are PsyCare Welfare. And we really just accept people into the space, treat them like another human, ultimately, that they are. And it's anything from, supporting somebody with sort of anxiety to some really big examples, which I'll touch on a little bit later. We have a fire at night, and that acts like a little beacon to anybody that's walking around feeling a bit lost. They gravitate towards the fire, and then maybe a conversation will start, and they realise they want to move into the space. We then have a private space at the back, so if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed by other things going on in welfare, we've got a space we can separate them into, or vice versa. They are overwhelming everybody else in welfare, and it makes sense to separate them. It goes both ways. But ultimately, it's just a lot of acceptance, a lot of understanding, a lot of, just seeing the other us in the other person. It doesn't matter what walk of life we've come from, there are similarities that we've all got. We are all human, and that's the basis that we work from. As time has gone on, our volunteer, for us, one of the most important things with our volunteers is that they are peers to the people that we are supporting. So it doesn't matter what background or professional background they come from, they must have experience in being at festivals, having potentially their own personal experience with substance use, understanding the sort of experiences that these people are having when they come to our space. As time's gone on, we get more and more applications for volunteers from sort of therapeutic backgrounds, so people working, whether it's in the NHS, whether they're training to be psychedelic psychotherapists, psychiatry, and all sort of complementary therapies as well. And all of that really helps complement the work that we do, but it's really not a requirement for the work that we do. Just being human is really, really the basis. I'm going to keep saying this word, but it really drives home what it is that we do. It's not always roses. We do get some really extreme cases, and I'm going to just give a couple of examples of situations that we've dealt with that are the reason that really highlight the reason that we exist. So we were at a festival a couple of years ago, and it was not a very psychedelic festival. It was a one-day festival that was free entry to everybody. So you had everything from grandparents with their toddlers to groups of teenagers and everything in between. And I suddenly heard over the radio that the medics were calling for security because there was a guy acting quite strange and quite violently in their space. But the way that they described it, instantly to me, it sounded like they were on some form of psychedelic. So I went and intercepted the situation, and I stopped these 8 burly security men rushing into medical, trying to intercept the situation. And I've walked in, and the guy was strapped to this medical bed. And one minute he's blowing kisses to everybody and going, "Oh, I love you." And the next he was trying to escape the bed. He was threatening to hurt people. He was being really, quite animated. And he was a big lad, so he was, there was a lot of strength behind what he was doing. I had a chat with the medics. It turned out he had taken LSD. So we negotiated with the medics and with security that we wanted to move him into our welfare space. Security were dubious because they were seeing how much he was flailing around and asking if we were really sure that we wanted him in our space. We managed to convince them, but with the sort of caveat that security would stay with us for a while just to make sure that the whole situation was safe. Once we moved the guy into our space, we had quite a large team at this festival, so 5 or 6 of us got involved. Each volunteered taking a limb each. Somebody else sat by the guy's head, just giving him lots of reassuring words, really sort of letting him know that we were there with him, not against him. We weren't trying to restrain him, but just to keep him safe and stop him from hurting anybody else or himself. He was in a bit of a loop. So he kept, like I say, he was blowing kisses, but then kind of getting quite aggressive. And some of the things that he was saying, a lot of it was asking for an alcoholic drink. He kept saying he really needed a drink, but then kept bringing things in about family and about politics. And it was slowly, just kind of little nuggets of what might have been going on internally for him. After a while, security sort of looked around and were like, "You guys have really got this, haven't you?" We were like, yeah, we do. Please do leave us. And they were like, "Fine, just give us a shout if you need us." And they left us with him. We were with the guy for perhaps 6 hours with this loop, just repeating and repeating. And in some situations, especially a few years ago, with festivals that didn't really have support for these kind of scenarios, often these people would get taken to hospital, they would get sedated, potentially temporarily sectioned. And you imagine sort of already having a very difficult trip where you can't quite grasp consensus reality. And then when you do come to consensus reality, you're in an unfamiliar place, you don't know how you got there, none of your friends are around, and that just sort of adds more layers to the traumatic experience that they were already perhaps experiencing. After sort of 6 hours, he was starting to come around and was able to have more sort of in-depth conversations with us. And it turned out that he had a lot of family trauma, that he was carrying a lot of guilt and shame around. A lot of it was things that had happened with his grandparents or great-great-grandparents. And due to that, he'd sort of removed himself from his immediate family now, but then that added more layers of guilt and shame because his family weren't really understanding why he wasn't spending as much time with them. And once we got in deeper, he had an absolute realization of why. It turned out he was an alcoholic, I should mention. And so the reason he kept sort of in his trip asking for an alcoholic drink was obviously these difficult feelings are coming up, and his usual response would be to grab a drink, but he wasn't able to in this moment. He ended up having a really, really deep realization of why he was drinking himself to oblivion. Really, really opened up to one of our colleagues who is a psychiatrist in his professional life. And we were able to offer him lots of really understanding support there and then, but then also give him sort of tools and information about where to go for further support. Sadly, we don't ever know what happens to people once they leave our space, so we don't know if he followed up on any of that support. But hopefully that was, a glimmer that perhaps had he been sedated, sectioned, taken to a thing, he would never have got to that realization. So it goes to show, the reason I use this example is just to show that even the most extreme situations, as much as it can seem really out there and, oh no, it needs to be squashed now because danger, actually, if there is a way to contain that, really, really good stuff can come from it. And like I say, as time's gone on, our volunteer community, we draw lots of different skills, life experience, and our volunteers organically have created their own sort of mini communities within the volunteer community. So there's now groups of like the London-based PsyCare volunteers, the Bristol-based PsyCare volunteers. There's always collaborations going on. It's not unknown that in the group chats that we have on WhatsApp, somebody will put a message saying, I've got a friend struggling with this thing. Does anyone have any recommendations or connections in this area? And there is just a flood of responses of different modalities and different sort of types of support or information available to them. So to me, it's kind of really grown into a therapeutic community, not just for the people that we support, but for each other as well. And to me, it feels like a little microcosm of how the world should be. We've all become, especially being from London, the idea of community and sort of village life and everyone sort of knowing everybody and supporting each other, it doesn't feel easy to find in London. I recently went away to India for a month, and India, they're very happy to stare. It's not an unknown thing to do. It doesn't matter where you go. People will just watch what you're doing. And as soon as I landed back, I got on the London Underground at rush hour, and it was packed. Everybody was on their phone or in a book. And it just was such a stark contrast to me, and it just really showed how disconnected we all are. And we can connect via our phones and via technology, but nothing beats that human interaction. So I want us to zoom out a little bit, and I'm just going to touch now on the difference in, so the level of support that we can offer in a recreational setting such as a festival is really, really different to being in everyday life when somebody is suffering a mental health crisis, or maybe it hasn't reached crisis point yet, depending on what your sort of, at what point a mental health issue has to escalate before it gets deemed a crisis. But, the NHS at the moment, it's full of lots of really good-hearted, well-intentioned people, but there is a lot of burnout. There's a lot of pressure on services. There are a lot of funding cuts. There are lots of, the requirements to get certain levels of support is getting tighter and tighter. So I'm just going to give some examples of things I've experienced. Admittedly, this was through lockdown, so things were a lot worse at that time, but I don't think things have got that much better since then. Somebody very, very close to me was going through a mental health crisis. I had known the person for 10 years prior, so I knew their kind of baseline character compared to how they were presenting in this sort of period of time. We were living in a house share. People in the house that we were living in didn't really understand why I was trying to support this person so much, because it was so up and down all the time. So I wasn't very supported by supposedly my friends in this house. And I was constantly calling crisis intervention teams when things got really bad. But often when you're one-on-one in a crisis, trying to call for help when you're in the crisis, you can't leave the person in order to call for that help. So you kind of wait until that crisis sort of de-escalates ever so slightly so that you can call for support. But at this point, they decide it's no longer a crisis and they can't really help. And this happened multiple times, back and forth. And unfortunately, the time that they did deem it enough of a crisis, the situation escalated, the police got involved, the person ended up getting arrested, and they were put in prison for a year, held on remand until their trial, with no support, nothing therapeutic, nothing visited, 24-hour lockup because it was lockdown. And the knock-on effect that had on me, because I felt really alone in this situation, I had nowhere to go for support. I didn't have a team of people supporting me to support this person, which I was so used to in recreational settings. And it just blew my mind that, in these fun environments, there is so much tight-knit support available, and yet out in everyday world, there's really not much. And just to show a couple of other, maybe not so heavy examples, somebody else I know at the moment, she's a young girl in her early 20s, and she's recently relapsed into alcoholism, and she's been back and forth into having crises almost every day and ringing 111 for support. Often she has to wait 4 or 5 hours before somebody calls her back, by which point her crisis has escalated even more because she's just bouncing off the walls within her own mind. Eventually, she'll go and sit in an A&E ward. She'll sit in a room on her own. She sent me a photo the other day where she was sat in a room that was a completely blank room, just sat on the bed, left alone for hours, because obviously there's many other emergencies that they're trying to deal with. And written on the wall was something that she had written maybe a year and a half ago on that same wall, saying, "Your emotions are valid, you are not broken, the system is." And the fact that that was still on the wall a year and a half later goes to show they can't even paint over the wall. So how are they, it just goes to show the strain. Another friend of mine got in touch with me recently because they were trying to support a friend. They felt that the situation was escalating and they needed some further support. So we spoke to some of our psychiatry friends, and the only suggestions were really like, maybe we can get them some benzos to help. Maybe they need to go to A&E. Neither of these things feel really therapeutic, especially when the contrast of the spaces that we offer, they're cozy, they're welcoming, there's tea available, there's understanding people, there's smiles. And a lot of the time, A&E is quite the opposite of that. Our mental health crisis is growing. So I just had a quick look the other day, and it's something like 1 in 4 suffer from mental health each year. 1 in 6 if you include anxiety and depression on top. Over 800,000 per month. And at the moment, there's something like 20,000 universal credit claims because of mental health per month. So it goes to show that, to me, that's a real sign that our society is not equipped to support people in mental health struggle. I think a lot of the way that society is set up with the cost of living crisis, the lack of support, the lack of community, all of these things feed into the mental health. So that ultimately the problem isn't just standalone with the person suffering, but actually with the whole network of how society is set up. And with this in mind, we've got the explosion of mental health research now with using psychedelics. The headlines have changed a lot in the last 10 years from, psychedelics will make you think you can fly, don't do them, to, they're going to heal all of your struggles and strife. And it's quite a misleading message, especially for people that are not in these spaces to kind of really understand. And so they're seeking alternative ways of getting support. And so there's more and more either underground retreats popping up or retreats over in places like Portugal and the Netherlands where the laws are different. And, integration is always a big topic in these things, and some retreats are doing really well in offering integration and aftercare, but often they're only maybe 1 to 3 integration sessions. There might be a WhatsApp group that's created for afterwards, but ultimately they're going so far away from their kind of familiar world to go and have this isolated experience. And we need to think about what psychedelics actually do. Is it inherently healing, or does it sometimes just create an HD awareness of everything that's wrong in society or in their own, in their own lives? They might suddenly be aware that their connections feel superficial, that their job is not what they want, that they have all of these changes that they need to make in their life, but they don't even know where to start. Often, private therapy is really expensive. If some of their struggle is through the cost of living crisis or just not having enough sort of spare money at the end of each month to live and cover their bare basics, then the idea of having ongoing private therapy is just unreachable for them. They may not even know to look for integration circles. Some people might be rejected from the clinical trials, so they may omit certain information in order to be accepted onto a retreat, and in which case that opens up a whole other can of worms. Some people stop taking medication that they've been taking regularly just to go and have these experiences. So I think we really need to think beyond the good intention of holding these experiences for people in the tight-knit space that is the retreat. It might be held really well in that space, but what is happening to those people once they leave that space? How easy is it for them to just fall back into old patterns as soon as they get into what was once a familiar surrounding that maybe didn't feel completely safe or comfortable, but at least it was what they knew, and now suddenly they feel like a stranger in their own land. So who is able to hold these spaces? And we've got to think about, the affordability of things. Who's holding support? What about the in-between? What about when it's not formal therapy, but just having therapeutic spaces, or maybe not even using the word therapeutic, just welcoming and accepting spaces that are not there to judge them, fix them, tell them anything. So what my real sort of dream is to have PsyCare type spaces on every high street, in every town and city, which people can drop into at any point. It might be that there is a cafe corner where they can literally just come in for a cup of tea and maybe be by themselves. maybe that's all they need. Maybe they want to have a chat with some people that are really understanding or that can at least relate to some of the experiences that they've gone through, whether it's some of the life experience that they've gone through, whether it's the psychedelic experience that they've had over in Portugal or the Netherlands. Maybe there can be a space within those cafe spaces that hold regular integration circles or just group sharing, just to share stories and let people see that they are not broken, they are just experiencing things that maybe many other people have experienced at different points in their life that can offer different insight. Sometimes speaking to people that feel more relatable, they're not a professional, even if they may have really professional qualifications that they're bringing into the space, but actually speaking from lived experience to say that I've survived this or I understand what you're going through can be far more healing than them feeling like there's somebody on a pedestal that needs to analyse them and tell them what's wrong in order to get, feel like they're, thank you, feeling like they're being on a healing path. The space can also offer things like a garden space where if people want to just be barefoot and feel the grass, they can do that. One of the people that I mentioned earlier, the girl that had written "You Are Not Broken, the System Is" on the hospital wall, she recently even in her most heightened states, she's very self-aware, and part of her fear is that if she just walks down the street barefoot, that she's going to get picked up by somebody and taken to hospital because they think she's really unwell, just because she's muttering her emotions and feeling the ground because she's trying to get back into her body. So to have spaces where people can just do this without judgment or, concern is really, really important. It can go a further layer. The cafe could have connections with people that are willing to offer low-cost one-on-one therapy. They can offer free sessions maybe, so you could have multiple people volunteering in the space. There could be activities like art, yoga, dance sessions. There could be informational talks. And it could be that we even have links to local mental health services. So when people are turned away for not being unwell enough, they have somewhere to go that is going to hold them and allow them to just be until they either find the support that they need, or perhaps it does reach crisis point, and in which case there can be a collaborative way of working to hold that situation for those people. It's a difficult thing to try and do. These things need funding, they need collaboration, they need spaces, they need a lot of work. But ultimately, the way I see it is that eventually, when we're working at festivals, often people that have been in our space and been cared for, sometimes we get resident guests that they come in on the Thursday or the Friday and they need support. But then once they're okay and they see other people coming in, they want to go and make a cup of tea for that person, or they want to suddenly become a part of the space. And so if people that have potentially been through the cafe, been through some experiences of their own, they want to come and give back, they can then go and volunteer in spaces in their own localities. And again, it just feeds back into that lived experience and that showing that we're all human. So being really volunteer, community, peer-led, but with the support of professional and more structured support, depending on the level of support that person needs. I'm coming towards the end now, but I think my point is to remove the idea of the us and them and just highlight that it's just us humans, and we all are trying to figure out this weird experience that is life. And if we can do that together without setting a hierarchy, that feels like a really important thing to me. So I'm going to leave it there, but let me know if you have any questions.